Chapter 32, and we were about to begin verse 9, but verse 9 begins a new section, verses 9 through verse 14. Woe upon the women. And kind of as a prelude to this, from a historical standpoint, women have always been the gatekeepers of morality. I would say men are just rotten, good-for-nothing people, but I won't go that far. But it has always been on the women to uphold morality from a historical standpoint. When the women let down the moral standards, then the nation is in trouble, which is what we're seeing in our society today. Paul said the men are just stupid. You can't fix that. Men are immoral, much more so than women. And that's why God gave that standard to women and not so much to men. If it was up to the men, things would be a free-for-all to a great extent. Women are different. And while our feminists of our day might not like it, and the younger generation that talks about all of this gender fluid nonsense, in reality, God created men and women different. Men have their place, women have their place. And with women, part of that place is that of upholding a moral standard. That's why you see, for example, can you show me anywhere where it talks about men dressing modestly? Dressing modestly. Any place in the Bible that you can point out? Now then, don't misunderstand the point that I'm saying here, because men have that obligation to dress in a moral way as well. But it's always addressed to the women, never to the men. Why? Because they're the ones who are going to uphold that standard. Men would not. And so when women start allowing that standard to drop, then morality as a whole is going to disappear eventually. And I say, our nation, that's really what is taking place. And of course, now then, it's so nutty that they can't even admit that there's only two genders. And in listening to some of them argue, it's so they would agree that there's only, from a biological standpoint, two sexes, man and woman. But when you get over to gender, they claim that gender is different from sex. And so you can be gender fluid. And if you ask how many genders are there, I don't know. They don't know.
Somebody said 54 in one thing I
read. Well, some have claimed hundreds as well. Basically, it is whatever you want it to be. And so you have these that are, I've forgotten all of the terms that they use in regards to that, but basically non-binary, I think is one of them, where they're not going to identify as a male or a female. Male or female. I can get confused in using the terminology. There's two sexes, man and woman, but gender, male and female, is fluid. There's a fluidity there that you can basically identify as anything.
Are you being sarcastic?
No, I am not being sarcastic in the least. That is what is being advocated today. And they do use those specific terms. That's what I was trying to get to in relationship to their terminology. And that's why some of them, if you ever use the pronouns he or him or she, or, that specify, they get upset. They want to be a they type of gender. So, it's, but getting back to the point, the women, God created them in such a way that they uphold the standards of morality. Men generally will not. So here we go into section woe upon the women. And when you say this, you start realizing with that type of a situation, the dire need that the nation is in. Isaiah had already addressed this. Turn back to Isaiah chapter 3. And we want to start reading in verse 16, and we'll go through verse 26. He says, moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks, and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making tinkling with their feet, therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. In that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their cauls, and their round tires like the moon, the chains and the bracelets and the mufflers and the bonnets and the ornaments of the legs, and the headbands and the tablets and the earrings, the rings and nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel and the mantles and the wimples and the crisping pins, the glasses and the fine linen and the hoods and the veils. And it shall come to pass that instead of sweet smell there shall be stink, and instead of a girdle a rent, and instead of well set hair baldness, and instead of stomacher a grinding of sackcloth, and burning instead of beauty. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war, and her gates shall lament and mourn, and she shall be desolate, and she, being desolate, shall sit upon the ground. What a description of the women and their sad condition. As you read that, doesn't it sound like a lot of today? And how that women try to use everything within their power to appeal to men, and then when men start noticing, they get upset. But God's going to take away all of those things, as we see there. Well, here we're going to see much the same thing. These women that are at ease, they did not concern themselves with political danger. Remember, Jerusalem had made agreements with Egypt, and so they thought that Egypt would protect them. So they were at ease. We don't have anything to worry about. Egypt will take care of us. Of course, Egypt wasn't going to be able to. But that was their belief, that Egypt would protect them and their homes. They were also indifferent regarding their spiritual condition. That probably is more that I think Isaiah is talking about than the political, although the political aspect with Egypt would have been a major influence of this. But they didn't care in relationship to the spiritual condition that they were in. If you look at the majority of Americans, are they concerned with the spiritual condition that they're in? Not a bit. I'll tell you, the amazing thing to me is they're totally unconcerned about any spiritual condition, and yet they believe that they're going to be saved. The majority of Americans, if you go, they probably believe in God. They don't know anything about Him, but they believe in God. And they believe that they're going to heaven.
A lot of them believe in the tulip. They're indoctrinated by their pastors.
No.
Some of them are. A bunch of them.
Well, some of them are, but most of them are what the world or the denominational world calls unchurched. The majority of Americans do not attend anywhere, don't go anywhere, don't do anything of a spiritual nature at all. And well, I know that. That's what I'm saying. Majority of Americans do not attend anywhere. They don't have any association with religion, and yet they would still believe in God, and they still believe that they're going to go to heaven. Now, I don't understand that myself, but that is a situation that we're in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet, of those 18, they probably all believe in God, and all of them know that they're going to heaven. Yet only 3 will attend any religious. So, and that's basically the situation you would see all over America. Now, some of them, of course, you'll come across those that don't believe in God, so you can exclude those in a certain way. But they're unconcerned about their spiritual condition. Why? Because they believe that they're safe. They're going to heaven, even though they won't darken the doors of any building, won't worship God, won't do anything of a spiritual nature, yet they're going to heaven. So why worry about it? Now, ye women that are at ease, that's the situation of those type of people. They're at ease. They shouldn't be, but they are. These women should not have been at ease. Their spiritual condition was, well, they were separated from God. And yet they thought they were safe. They thought they were safe from a political standpoint because Egypt would take care of them. So they didn't have to worry about that. They were children of Israel. They were Israelites, and so God was their God, and they were His children. Whether they lived that way or not didn't matter. this was, while it's addressed to the women, it, in reality, was the condition of the entire nation, the people as a whole. They were unaware of the impending danger that was coming. I mean, in reality, while Sennacherib comes and he is not able to take the city, but there's certainly, he destroyed the southern kingdom, even though Jerusalem was spared. And later on, they were destroyed by the Babylonians. Well, they were unaware of all of that, unconcerned with it because they thought they were safe. And I'll add this. I think one of the hardest things to do, even with Christians, is to get them to really realize their spiritual condition. We look at, and I'm not talking about any specific congregation, but the church as a whole. They are, in so many places, so many congregations, the majority of the people have absolutely no concern about spiritual matters, even though they will attend on services. You see that in numbers. And I know preachers have used this many a time through the years. Sunday morning, just to give an illustration, they have 100 people there. Sunday night, 50. Wednesday night, 30. Why? Because the majority of the people that are attending there on Sunday morning are unconcerned about their spiritual condition. And yet they believe that they're saved. If you ask, go around, are you saved? Yeah, well, sure, I'm saved. I'm going to go to heaven. When in reality, they're not. To get them to realize their spiritual condition is extremely difficult. And sometimes, through the years, I would love to just go up and slap somebody across the face a few times and say, pay attention.
That's the reason when a sound preacher comes in and tells them that, they get fired.
No, that's not the reason.
That ain't why. I'm sorry. I'm wrong.
Because those people they don't get it. The ones that get it would cause sound preachers to get fired. But these people that I'm talking about, they don't get it. Unless you go up and just totally, it's almost like, do you realize that you're going to hell? And then they would argue with you, no, I'm not. To get them to realize their spiritual condition is difficult. Others can see it, but they can't see it in themselves. Yes.
I moved here in 2016, so I've been here for over 6 years now. But what I've noticed in Pensacola is, when I first moved here, there were, as far as I know, 3 bookstores that professed to be a Christian bookstore. There was a Lifeway Christian right next to Marshall's on Airport. There was a Family Christian bookstore about a quarter-mile
On Creighton.
west of that. And there was a Gospel. What was the name of that bookstore on Gospel House? That's the name of it. Navy.
Yeah.
All 3 of those are ashes now.
Yeah.
All 3 of those are no longer in existence. It's really sort of indicative of the lack of spirituality or just the lack of interest in general. Anything spiritual. That's just something I noticed. When I was teaching the class I would go to the Lifeway Christian because I mean I know what the Bible says. I was interested in what the denominations were currently teaching about premillennialism, so I'd go over there and grab books on premillennialism to get the denominational viewpoint, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that option isn't even available to me anymore.
No.
So I mean, because there's just that lack of interest in things spiritual
In general.
and it's reflected in the closure of those, you know,
Yeah.
bookstores that profess to be Christian.
And the one on Navy had another store over on Creighton. It had they had two stores. Both of them closed.
I've only
So,
been here 6 years, you know, and that's just something that really kind of stuck out in my mind.
the lack of general interest that you're talking about is, I think, one of the reasons that religious groups and some churches of Christ have tended toward recreation, entertainment, whatever will draw crowds. And if we can provide the most entertainment, that's where people will go. So they hire professional musicians to come and play. And that's really what they are. They are professional musicians that they hire, they pay to be there in order to entertain people, and through that draw the crowds. And then you have those groups also that they don't care whether you're there or not. In reality, as long as you send the money in. I know of a person who was converted from, I'll just mention, Baptist church. That person, they didn't care. They just wanted to make sure that the person continued to send the contribution in. And so they continued to write letters and trying to get them to give money. Where's your tithes? Their purpose statements. And that's all that they were concerned about. But a lot of people today, they're unaware of their impending doom from a spiritual standpoint. And we might also say, in relationship to our nation, maybe our impending doom, if things don't change for the better. Thus, they were to rise up or stand up to hear God's message of doom to them. They were to do exactly the opposite of what they were doing. A complete change of attitude and action was in order on their part. Homer Haley states about this that, quote, there 3 commands are issued. Rise up. This is not to be taken literally as if they had been sitting haughtily, but is merely a call to be attentive. And 2, hear my voice. That is, understand what I am saying, take it to heart. And 3, give ear unto my speech. Respond to what I say by demonstrative action. In reading that rise up, I thought about a song that we sing. Stand up for Jesus. And I know a lot of people, when they sang that, thought that they needed to stand up physically. I've seen it happen where just one or two people will stand up because they're singing "Stand Up for Jesus," so they're wanting to stand up. That's not what it meant. Much like this "rise up." Pay attention, in other words, in regards to stand up for Jesus. That is, you defend the truth. You defend what Jesus has said and what he is. It has nothing to do with the physical posture that one might find themselves in when they're singing it. But a lot of people don't seem to get that as they sing the song. But you have the same type of situation here. Rise up. What is it? Well, pay attention to what it's being said. Give ear. Hear my voice. Or hear my voice. And not just listen to what is being said, but understand it. A lot of people listen, but they don't understand. They hear, but they don't really understand what is being said. And thus, a lot of times individuals get misrepresented because they hear something that the person didn't say because they didn't understand. Give ear unto my speech. Well, that's respond. You respond in obedience to what God says. Young, in his commentary, pointed out, and we kind of discussed about this point, that, quote, if the women of a land thus have false security and confidence, they cannot inspire the men to act rightly and to ward off the dangers that threaten, end quote. You know, women, and I'm sure all of you know this, really control men. They can basically get men to do whatever they want them to do. And there's a lot of different ways in which women can wield that power. But in reality, that is the situation. Women can get men to do what they want done. And in this type of a situation, the women need to be getting the men to do that which is right and in accordance with God's will and to live according to God's will. And they weren't doing it, so they could not get the men to do it. So in verse 10, he says, many days and years shall be troubled, ye careless women. For the vintage shall fail, the gathering shall not come. The New King James, instead of many days and years shall ye be troubled, has in a year and some days. That really expresses a little bit more the idea that in a little more than a year, but less than 2 years, is what he's dealing with, that time frame. So in that time frame, they would be troubled, and the word troubled there literally means to tremble or quake with fear. Remember a certain individual that Paul preached to of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come? And his response, Felix, as Paul reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, what did he do? he trembled. Agrippa is the one who said, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Felix trembled, said, go thy way, for this time, when I have a convenient season, I'll call for thee. But he trembled, he shook with fear. Have you ever seen someone that is so afraid they're just literally shaking? That's the idea that's being presented by troubled here. So, in more than a year, less than 2 years, they're going to be troubled, shake with fear. No doubt of the Assyrian invasion that he's talking about. Syrians come, surround Jerusalem. They're going to shake with fear because of that invasion. The women here, careless, they're complacent, and the Hebrew word means to be confident, trust, or unsuspecting. They're unsuspecting. In other words, they really hadn't paid any attention to what's going on. While I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet yet, I would say that our nation is probably at some time going to be destroyed. And a lot of the people are totally unsuspecting of it because they don't know history, they don't know God's Word, and they don't realize, for example, what Solomon said, that righteousness exalteth the nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. They don't realize that. And so they're totally careless about it. They have a trust in, well, our military or our weaponry or all of these other things. And so they are careless. They're complacent within their life. Okay, Dale.
Some of the talk shows, and I don't listen to them habitually, say that one of the end games of one group of people, I'm not going to call them out, but they want to bring the United Nations here, and they want to bring people assembled from South America. They want to bring them across our borders, and they're gradually planning to do it. They're calculating it out. That's what I've heard some of them say.
Okay. If you just look at the southern border, that's already been taking place for years.
But I mean,
The
armies, organized,
there
that are hidden in sight.
there has been an effort for decades now for there to be a one world government, and that's what they are trying to get to. Now these women are careless women because in all probability they're unconcerned about these matters because their overconfidence in security, their security. Again, they have that agreement with Egypt, and Egypt will take care of them. They can't come in here and harm us. The vintage, that would be the harvesting of grapes and the making of juice, will fail, he says. Probably a reference to a literal failure. The crops are destroyed because of the Assyrian invasion. Pulpit commentary says, though, that others suggest a reference to chapters 4 through 7. The vineyard of the Lord, Judah, has utterly failed to bring forth grapes. There is no ingathering, therefore destruction shall fall upon it. And so he they were saying that the vintage there, instead of being physical, literal grapes and the gathering of those grapes and making the juice, was the nation of Judah itself. That the nation of Judah is going to fail. And there's no ingathering as a result. Gathering shall not come. Instead of the gathering of grapes, the gathering of Judah will not come. This, I think, though, has reference to the feast of ingathering. Turn over to Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter. And in verses 13 through 15, Deuteronomy 16, 13 through 15, it says, "Thou shalt observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. After that thou hast gathered in thy corn and thy wine, and thou shalt rejoice in thy feast, thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant, and the Levite and the stranger and the fatherless and the widows that are within thy gates. 7 days thou shalt keep a solemn feast unto the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase, and in all the works of thy hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice." It was a time of great rejoicing. This feast of ingatherings, the gathering of all of these things. That ingathering and that feast, one of the most joyful celebrations that they had because of the crops that they had. But it's not going to come. The present luxury that they enjoyed, the riches that they had, all that God had blessed them with, was coming to an end. And again, cannot help but think of our nation and how that God has so greatly blessed our nation. We are still the richest nation upon the earth. And we have things that, well, our poor people would be rich in relationship to other nations. They are given basically things that other nations, the well-to-do people, don't even have. Now then, God's greatly blessed us, and we have forgotten Him and turned our backs on Him as a nation, I'm talking about, and gone after the most evil, vile things that this world has to offer. And those things are promoted, and now then, if you object to them or say that they're sin, then they persecute you. They initially got people to accept those vile things. They went from acceptance to now then they attack those who would say there's something's wrong with it. Good illustration would be homosexuality. It started off as a vile thing. They were identified by the medical association as someone who's mentally ill. Now then, if you mention that, boy, they're going to crucify you. Let me say that pedophilia is the next thing that will be accepted, if it is not already mainly accepted. And if you don't believe that, how many people who committed pedophilia at Epstein's Island have even faced any criminal charges. 0. The only one was the one, well, he was going to be in jail, and then he got Epstein. He committed suicide. And then the one who got the women and the young children for the pedophiles, Ghislaine Maxwell. It still amazes me there's been no crime in relationship to anything that she did or provided, so how could she have committed a crime? There has to be, there were victims supposedly, but there were no victims. It doesn't make sense until you start realizing the power of the pedophilia industry. There was a group of pedophiles whose motto, this was 30, 40 years ago: sex before 8 or it's too late. Now then, nothing was done to them. But that was their motto. That's what they pushed for. And so it's starting to be accepted today. Whereas, years ago, no way that would be accepted. But anything that you can think of from that type of a sexual aspect will soon be accepted as normalized and normal activity. If the homosexuals and their arguments that stay out of the bedroom, keep your laws out, well, if that's true, then what about, again, pedophilia? What about incest and things like that? Where does that come into play? Okay, Dale, you need. Okay. We will start then next time with verse 11.